As we discussed previously, there are several different modes or server modes with 2012. There are three actually. There's the minimal user interface, there's the core mode, which has only the PowerShell, and finally there's the full GUI for Windows Server 2012. So we can change our interface mode, so we can convert a server with the full GUI to server core. We can convert a server core to minimal server interface, and we can convert a server core or minimal server interface to a server with a full GUI. So we can go back and forth between these different user interfaces if we need to. So why would we convert a server with the full GUI down to a server core installation? Well, that's we want to take advantage of the smaller footprint and much fewer resources that are needed to operate the server. And then we may want to downgrade it, not downgrade it, but convert it to the interface that doesn't include all those GUI components. So it does give us the flexibility of removing those GUI components. So one thing you may do is start with the full graphical user interface with a server, and once you have it configured, you may remove the graphical user interface components. That way it just runs in core mode. But then later on, if you needed to do something that required some of those user interface components, you could always add them back. Of course, it's much easier just to manage the server from the UI from another machine, which we're going to talk about that here in just a few minutes. So converting a server core involves removing two features. So you'll remove the graphical management tools and the infrastructure and server graphical shell. If you remove those tools, you will no longer have the graphical user interface, and you'll be essentially running as server core. So you'll be losing all of that graphical user interface components, which you actually really don't need, as we talked about before. Now, if you have server core, you can also go to the minimal server interface. So this is the new feature that's kind of a happy medium between server core and the full graphical user interface. So you can go in between the two. Basically, the minimal server interface is going to give you the server manager, MMC, and some of the control panel applets. And of course, you still have the PowerShell, so you can do everything you can do in server core, but you also have these other tools available to you. So if you're not comfortable with some of the command line tools, you can add back in with the minimal server interface. You can have some of those tools available to you in the graphical user interface. Not all of them, but some of them. For example, you would be missing Internet Explorer, the File Explorer, so you'd still have to use the command line to explore the file system, for example. So if you have any applications that require any of those components for you to work with them, you may not be able to use those in the minimal server interface. And of course, you wouldn't be able to do that with server core either. But again, it's a nice happy medium between that full graphical user interface and the server core interface, which only gives us the command line tools. So to convert to a server with a GUI, it's starting from a server core installation. Both server GUI management infra and server GUI shell will need to be installed. If minimal server, and by the way, this is what you would call them when you're running them from the command shell. So if you're in a server core installation, you won't have a user interface to select these roles or unselect the roles. So you would have to use the command line to do that, the PowerShell to do that, and this is how you would reference them. And the command to do that, by the way, was a few slides back, the command to install or remove services and roles, features and roles. If the minimal server interface is installed, then you can install just the server GUI shell. And if you do that, you'll have your the full user interface. To switch from the minimal server interface to a server with a GUI, then you'll run this command, which is install Windows feature, server GUI shell, and then restart, and it'll come back up, and you'll have your full user interface. And it doesn't take long, so this is something that you could do if you needed to, if you just need to use that GUI shell for something specific and you can't do so from a remote system. Or maybe you're installing some application or some program that requires that. To switch from server core to a server with a GUI, then you would run this command. So this is the command you would run to install both. So you'll notice here in one, we're only installing the server GUI shell. So if we're in the MSI interface, we only need server GUI shell. If we're in server core, we need both server GUI management infra and server GUI shell, and then it gives us the full environment. And by the way, if you're in core and you only need the minimal server interface, you would just run install Windows feature server GUI management infra, and that will give you the minimal server interface. All right, so in the next slide deck, I'm going to talk about remote management.